Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Flea. I had sort of heard about this film before, but I think it grabbed most people's attention when in the recent Oscar nominations it was nominated for Best Animated Feature, Best International Feature, and Best Documentary, which has never been done before. That's pretty insane. So I was interested because I know there are a lot of animated documentaries. As someone who reviews animation and talks about animation, we don't actually talk about that stuff enough, which is... we should. There's a lot of them, other than like Waltz for Bashir and this one seem to be the two that get the most attention. Most of them get attention on the festival circuit, but you don't hear about them much other than that. However, I know this one's been very acclaimed, and it's been overrated for a lot of people, and I can understand that. I get sick of hearing about some movies at a certain point, and it kind of ruins seeing them. And I understand like getting nominated for all those is insane and crazy, and I've noticed that in some of the reviews, particularly the ones after this announcement, after this film became a much bigger deal all of a sudden. Bigger than I think even the people who made it didn't think it was going to do that. Or how could you? But since it's the first time that's ever happened. But this is a very spectacularly done film. I wish I saw more animated documentaries. This kind of makes me want to. But it is kind of almost simply done, which I think it's very economical, but the story is not simple. It's the story of being a refugee from a country and then sort of finding somewhat of a home at the end of it and the damage that does to you. The character who's called Amin, who's only called that, that's what we don't know his real name, but that's what he's called in the films because he doesn't want to get in trouble or anything like that. He grew up and was born in Afghanistan, where he grew up with his family, and then because of various political changes had to leave Afghanistan. His father was basically taken away. They never saw him again. They don't know. They still don't actually, they don't know what happened to him. And his family left. They had to go to Moscow because it's the only place that would take them and let them seek asylum. And this was Moscow in Russia right after the Berlin Wall fell. All the complications of that, trying to get out of Moscow. And eventually, he's in Denmark. That's at the beginning of the movie. It spoils nothing there. But how his journey to get there, which has more complications than I can describe in this YouTube video. Because it took years to get there. All the life and the growing and the distrust that came from that experience. And I don't think I've seen films talk about Middle East political disruption and the effect that had on people, like Persepolis, for example. This felt different because I've seen people compare it to films that do those, but I would not compare it to a film just about that. I would compare it to the story of a refugee, actually, of them finding what their new normal or what their new life or is going to be. On top of that, Amin is also gay, and he's trying to kind of figure out his own sexuality on top of all that, which seems almost insurmountable. Well, he's trying to sort of find out his place as a grown man as he's settling down with his partner and buying a house and sort of figuring that out and his kind of questioning of that. And this is a very interesting kind of character study. I would call it a character study. I mean, character study implies fictional, but I would say since it centers so much on someone in a particular, the idea of home and the idea of trust and the idea of family and how that's completely disrupted by what happened and how his life from basically childhood to adulthood and how it was disrupted and how it was changed and everything he had to go through and how that shaped him as a person. And that makes Flea a very powerful movie. I don't think I've seen one that just tackles that. I think a lot of films want to tackle like you just in the country or you leaving the country or something like that. But to go through that entire transition is fairly different. But I don't know. I quite like the idea of a documentary just talking about that. I thought that was really very fascinating. And even though I had heard in huge praise of this film, I understand its kind of function in what the story is trying to tell and how unique that actually is, which is incredibly unique. You don't see that kind of a thing really ever. I've never seen a film like this before. It is sort of, I guess you could almost call it mixed media. It's mainly animated in this sort of, it's semi-rotoscopy, but not really kind of style. They use archival footage. They use, photographs. They use even some stuff that was clearly shot now, or maybe it was stock footage, I don't know, to mix and match stuff, which I really like that a lot. One of the things I don't like about documentary is sometimes it's more about the story they're telling and not necessarily how they tell the story. And you get something that like, oh, that story's so compelling, but the filmmaking and the storytelling is relatively pathetic and light and not as interesting. And this film, that's not true at all. They very much like are very compelling, great storytellers, and are able to use different animation styles and different kind of character designs to really highlight the various things that are going on very well. Actually, it dramatizes it in a way that's like experimental and interesting and scary, but almost doesn't play as that. It's probably much more of an experimental documentary and an artsy documentary than people realize, because once you get into you're following you're not thinking about all that. You're thinking about how you're following him. So, I often think, is it more interesting to make an experimental film the whole time you're thinking about how it's artistic and experimental and stuff, or is it more interesting to do that and no one really realizes what you're doing? And I kind of think it's more interesting the other way. I quite like this film. It's interesting because as interesting as this film was, and I was really engaged by it, I almost feel like there isn't too much to say. I almost feel like it's so straight ahead, and it's almost like you don't question it in a way, and I like that. I understand some people wouldn't. I think that's kind of what makes it so inviting and interesting as well, because we don't get that a lot. Everything's really fucking long now and tries to do these convoluted things, and this film doesn't, but it takes a story that in itself is fucking convoluted and is crazy, and it is going to have all these complications in it because of the idea of trying to get to a safe country and all the problems you would have doing that. Like, that is a real life story that has all those problems with it. It's interesting they made this film, which is like around 90 minutes or so, but it is a very tight 90 minutes. I really liked Flea quite a bit, and I want to be more open to films like animated documentaries, because it is such a much more interesting world. And I know if you see an indie animated film, people are like, it's not like Disney, Disney's scared and all that. We get it. The only thing that's animated is Disney and stuff, but I do think like this is doing far more experimental things than anyone mainstream wise is even doing, minus like Mitchell's vs. the Machines, and mixing with media and telling a different story and everything. And it makes me want to be more open to these. So if anyone actually knows of any I haven't reviewed, I'd be open to that as well. But I think this film, let's look at this film and this opportunity as more of a gateway into different kinds of things. And if anything shows you animation isn't a genre, watch this and watch Encanto and try to pretend it is. Flea, I think, is the kind of animated documentary that shows you kind of what animation can do in this format, and pushes the medium forward in a way that, almost in a simply way, that shows you like the power of a simple economical story and how animation can make that come alive. Because just seeing some live action reenactments and photographs and stuff, this film wouldn't feel as investing and as inviting as it is. And when I felt like I was like tearing up towards the end, it wasn't because of like a documentary kind of making me sad. It felt like I was watching like a narrative feature. And I think that this, in my mind at least, blended the lines, or as a viewer it blended the lines. I know it was a documentary, I'm not an idiot, but it blended the lines in terms of the viewer, that I think it becomes a lot more than you'd expect from your standard kind of talking head documentary, even though in terms of how they made it, in a certain sense it is, but it's like a whole lot more, telling you, documentary is supposed to be interesting filmmaking and interesting story to make a full, well-made, filmmaking wise documentary. And I think Flea does that to such a groundbreakingly amazing way. It's kind of hard to sit there and deny. One of the most compelling ways I've seen someone use and twist and turn a documentary to tell a really courageous, amazing story that I think I've seen in quite a bit. So if you have seen Flea and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to.